Thank you everyone for joining us tonight on our November edition of our Goat and Sheep webinar series. My name is Brenda Miller and I am the Extension Educator in Todd County, Minnesota for Livestock Production Systems. On the U of M team we have tonight Colleen Carlson in Scott and Carver counties, Troy Selzer in St. Louis County, Emma Severins in Nicollet and Sibley counties, and Travis Hoffman is our sheep specialist on a joint appointment with North Dakota State University and the University of Minnesota Extension. We have two very special guests tonight. We have Tom Peterson from Sauk Centre, Minnesota. Tom raises Boer meat goats, and Caroline Scheffert from Waseca County, or Waseca, Minnesota, which is also in Waseca County. She raises sheep, registered Polypay. So tonight, Tom and Caroline are going to share with us a little bit of how they got started in either the sheep or goat business, things that they've learned along the way, where they are, and some plans for the future. So if you have questions for them at any time, just drop them in the chat box and we will get them answered. And with that, I will have Caroline take it away here. She's going to be our first speaker.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you guys tonight. I am going to just share my screen here. All right. So as Brenda had said, I am from Waseca, Minnesota. I grew up on a sheep farm. I'm a third generation sheep farmer. My grandpa had sheep, my dad has sheep, and I have sheep. And my farm name is Follow-On Farms. And just a little background as to how I came about with that is my farm name kind of comes from the meaning of sheep that are in the Bible. Jesus talks in John chapter 10 about how the sheep listen to his voice and they know him and they follow him. And just like sheep are herd animals, they follow one another and they follow the shepherd's voice. And we are God's sheep and he is our shepherd. So we follow one God. So that's kind of how Follow-On Farms came about. I honestly thought about it for about 2 years before it came about. I think I spent a night weighing lambs one night. It was hot, it was humid, it was gross. And I was driving at the time from my parents' house to an apartment that I was living in. And I was sitting at a stoplight at about 10:30 at night. And that's when I thought of this farm name. So don't ever be worried about your farm name taking forever to be thought of, because it sure took me a long time to think about it myself. Here's a couple photos of me as you can see me in the video, but I was involved in 4-H and FFA when I was in high school, and I continued in FFA until I was much older, into college. I showed up at the Minnesota State Fair until I was 21. I did participate in Little International when I went to SDSU for my undergrad. I graduated with a ag science degree and a minor in animal science. And I took a big focus in just kind of production agriculture when I was out at SDSU. I also am a part of the Minnesota Lamb and Wool Producers and still am active at a lot of their events and different things that they do. So just kind of a little background about where I got started. This is my family, my mom, Kim, my dad, Steve, and then we do have one of our border collies down here named Maggie. And it's just the three of us. My dad and I do kind of run sheep jointly together. And so that's kind of where I got to start. He has about 150 production ewes that are just commercial. We do kind of a Polypay Suffolk cross on them. And then he lambs them out and we direct market those and sell those mostly for meat. Not too much wool. Our wool quality is pretty low. But I got started with the Polypays when I graduated college. I still wanted to be able to show sheep even after I was all done. And I just loved the disposition of the Polypays. And they also give a good all-around breed when it comes to being good mothers. They have okay wool and they do grow pretty easily and pretty well. And a lot of people look for polypays for different reasons in the sheep industry. If they're either looking for a cross for a commercial herd, or otherwise sometimes they are used for out of season breeding, or they're also used when it comes to using flushing ewes or recip ewes if you're ever doing any of that kind of stuff. So I'll kind of get started on exactly what I do for a year-round basis with my sheep. I have 20 ewes. It's actually quite small in comparison to what my dad has, but my goal when I started in 2016 was to have 20 ewes. And just this last year was when I kind of hit that number. And I also had my 100th lamb born, which is kind of exciting, at least since I started with the registered polypays. I purchased 3 through a sale, sight unseen. I had someone down at the sale that helped me purchase them and get them brought back. But I started with 3 ewes and now I'm up to 23 that'll be lambing this coming January. I do lamb my ewes in January. I'm typically shooting for my first sheep sale to be the end of June. I take them to the Midwest Stud Ram sale. And so I'm wanting those January lambs to start getting some good size on them. And people are always looking for January and February. In my experience, when it comes to breeding stock in the fall, if you're purchasing a new ram for your flock. So my mature ewes will start in February. We actually had trouble the first couple of years lambing them in our normal sheep barn. It's an old dairy barn that's converted, but since my sheep are the only ones that were shorn, the temperature in the lambing barn was still a little low, and I was running into trouble with some frostbite on my lamb's ears. So we have a hog barn. We do raise hogs as well, but pretty small operation, and had some extra space. So we purchased some stall mats, rubber stall mats that a lot of people use for dairy barns or horse barns, and laid them down on top of the slats. And that is what I actually lamb my ewes on in January. So a little bit more manual work with that because I do have to hand pitch all of those pens. But the good thing is I don't have to worry about frozen lambs, which is nice. I do work full time. So during the day, if my dad isn't able to check on the sheep while I'm at work, those mamas can take care of their babies all on their own. My ewe lambs, I typically start them lambing, late March into April, and they do lamb in my dad's barn because at that time he is lambing. So it's easier to kind of have them moved over at that point. But that January and February group primarily is in that hog finishing barn doing lambing in there. My lambing pens are a 5x5 lambing pen, so it gives enough space for my ewes and their lambs. And typically I am having lambs either singles or twins. I don't have as many triplets. Every once in a while I'll get one in there. But my lambing percentage is definitely something a little on the, lower side. But I'm appreciative that my girls can definitely feed their lambs 100%, and I don't have a lot of bottle babies. Our commercial production flock that my dad does, he does about 150 ewes. He starts right after President's Day in February. So basically that last little bit of February and goes all the way to the end of March. He's got about 150 ewes that lamb in that time period. So stays pretty busy. He is a full-time farmer, so he's able to be home the entire time that is going on. Just a snapshot. These are actually our lambing pens that we have in our dairy barn, or in that old dairy barn. Since then, the stanchions have been pulled out and obviously have converted it to sheep. There's been sheep in this barn for probably 30 years. My dad's been living at this property for longer than I've been alive. And so he went through and kind of converted it to make it available. So we use kind of these wire cattle panels and time together with twine string to be able to allow the mothers to be in some jug pens with their lambs. This is just one side. I've got two other pictures I'll show you, but there's certain pens that do allow for a little bit more space for some of our twins and triplets. There's a couple pens that are a little smaller that work well for singles, but we kind of are able to shuffle them all into these pens. And typically once the lambs are placed in there, they're in there for a day or so and then get pulled right back out and put into a group pen, which is in a different area of the barn. But it definitely took my dad a lot of drawing to figure out a good amount of space to situate these ewes, situate these gates, and still have feeders to be able to reach everything. This is kind of the center of the barn. As you can see right in the center, we demonstrated a scenario where you may need to have a ewe in some type of a head chute. If they aren't accepting their lamb well, or you're needing to graft or foster something, we have this handmade kind of wood stanchion that allows the lambs to skirt around the backside of the ewe, but she still has a spot where we can feed her, water her, and she can get kind of that stuff from us. But it allows us to still be able to monitor the lambs and whatnot. So that is demonstrated kind of in the center here. And just kind of something that we put together and handmade. You can adjust the bolts on the top to slide a piece of wood over to allow the head to either be stuck in that stanchion or otherwise slide it to the side if you need to let them out. And then this is just the opposite side of the pen. Basically, you kind of got three photos of our lambing pens or our lambing jug pen. We're able to kind of put those ewes around in the circular area and feed them still in the center together. Their lambs get some space where they can crawl into a corner and kind of snuggle up, and it works really great. And you can still see there's still some heat lamps in there as well too. So if we ever need to give some of that supplement, it does help. This is just a sample here of the records that I use. So as you can see, I take a birth date, I take a lambing tag number, a sex, their birth weight. I do add other weights behind that, either weaning weight or any other weights I add in. This one I obviously did not update very well because there are more weights on these lambs, but I just did not get them added in prior to this presentation. A ewe tag number, the sire that the ewe was bred to, the number of lambs that were born. And then I also do take some information when it comes to body condition score, how well they're milking, and kind of how well they're taking care of their lambs. I'll also do some notes on it as well. I didn't add my notes section since there isn't too much there, at least for this set of lambs. And then if I did have any that died, I do take notes on it and sometimes list kind of a death date on them as well. Anything that was born, stillborn, or not alive at birth gets an A or a B listed after it, just because then I can keep track of what lambs were to what ewe, if there are surviving lambs or if they're non-surviving lambs, because they typically won't get an actual tag number that associates with them because they have passed, but I still have a way to record them to where their mother's at. One exciting thing that I'm excited to add to my records, though, is I'm also part of the NSIP Association, National Sheep Improvement Program. Polypays are a big portion of this. There are other breeds a part of it, but at a lot of our sales, Polypays do have a large following or showing with that. And there's a new project that is starting Ronald Lewis of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln is doing a project they call Sheep Gems, Genetics, Environment, Management, and Society. They're working to improve the robustness and climate resilience in sheep in US populations through genomics or through their genes. So as part of this, some of the things I'm going to be adding is going to be more notes on lambing assistance, adding udder scores and teat placement. If some of you have sheep already, you might notice one ewe to the next might have a different type of bag, if it stays up farther or if it sags down more. Teat placement can actually be a big factor for lambs when they're trying to find the teat right after birth. So keeping track of that. I do body score all of my ewes at lambing, but I'm not as good at body scoring or taking body weights at other times of the year. And as part of this project, I will be beginning to do that, taking weights and body condition scores on ewes at weaning and at breeding season. Most of the time at breeding season, I'm probably looking at them to make sure they're in good condition to head into breeding season. If they need a little bit more corn or need a little bit more stuff in the gas tank, basically, is how I like to describe it, to get through gestation. But this at least will start getting me to put more of a focus on exactly the body condition score they're at, so I can keep an idea of how they progress throughout the year. There's also a section on disposition and more information on when you need to intervene with health. If you're giving a treatment or having troubles with certain things, there's different scoring that they use as part of this project that I'm really excited to add to my records to be able to kind of keep track of some of those things in my flock. I'll be honest, my records are much more complex than what most people do in their sheep barns. Anyone I've talked to, I take really good notes on a lot more things in comparison to what your general records might be. Some may not even have weights in there. It's always hard to say. So take records for what is good in your flock, but it's really nice, I will say, to be able to refer from year to year as how your ewes are doing in regards to body condition score or how many lambs they're having, if they're having any troubles, if you need to check on any notes. There's a lot of times that I'm spending time out in the lambing barn looking over old records just to kind of see, okay, what happened last year. And this also helps in the event that you do have to keep or cull an animal, because you can refer back to that as well. I am lucky because even with a small flock, I can piggyback on my dad's big flock. And we are using the Shearwell EID system. And so what you'll see here in this photo is the yellow tag that's in the ear tagger is an EID tag. And every single one of our sheep gets an EID tag in their ear. And that's the way that we can help keep track of them in our flock. When we lamb, we scan that tag and that tag goes into the lamb's ear. And that keeps the record of the lamb, the birth date, any of the weights. We do add some notes to the system. That's why when I say on my previous slides where I didn't have as many of the extra weights on, was because I use this EID for a lot of my weighing stuff. And then I don't have to go back into my Excel document and input that information. But all of my lambing information, all of my body score conditions, all of that, those notes are still in the electronic system. And so when I'm sharing my different weights with NSIP to determine what kind of genetic potential my sheep have, that EID system makes it really easy for me to share that data with NSIP. And so I can send it off to them and then they analyze it and send me back the information as to how my sheep potentially could perform when it came to different performance traits. This is actually kind of an expensive system for a small flock of 20. So to be honest, it's really nice for a bigger flock, but if you have the option to piggyback on something like this, I would say go for it. But if you're tech savvy and want to have a try at it, it's a really great system. It's taken a little bit to learn. To say if I would still have it if I just had 20 sheep, I'm not 100% sure. But since I'm lucky enough to be able to piggyback, it's kind of nice to be able to use that. All right. So going from weaning to finish, my lambs are weaned anywhere between 60 to 30 days of age. So my January group, they'll sometimes be grown pretty quick and you'll hit a point and go, okay, it's 60 days. Let's get them weaned. All of my rams are left intact. I do not castrate anything since I am selling for breeding stock. I do select my replacement ewe lambs at this time because anything after I keep my replacement ewe lambs, the remaining breeding stock is all available for sale, either as private treaty if someone wants to purchase them right off of the farm, or otherwise I do attend 2 big sales throughout the summer and participate in some online sales to sell my breeding stock, both breeding ewe lambs and breeding rams. If anything does not fit breeding quality, say for example, something doesn't either had an injury or maybe isn't growing as well, or for some reason I just don't think is good enough breeding quality, those get set aside and I direct market them to friends and family and local people in the Waseca area for lamb. We sell them as half or whole. You purchase the live animal for the most part, and it gets processed at a local, sorry, my dog is barking at something outside, so I apologize if she's making a racket. So they get sold and you can either get a half or a whole. And so that's one other way that I do market my animals, but sometimes there isn't always a lot. If I get a really good group of lambs, then it is set to go. We were joking earlier about how goats would smile, but I also think sheep do smile as well. So here's just kind of a cute picture that I found. And you got a smiling lamb. Sorry, something must be very scary outside. My little border collie that has to protect. All right, so in the summer and the fall, all of the ewes are weaned and they're basically on dry hay and pasture as it's available. We don't have a ton of pasture since we have close to 160, 170 sheep at our place. And so a lot of times they are fed off of round bales. But if we have pasture, then we like to have it. My lambs are separated out, rams and ewes, and are basically set up to start growing for your standard breeding production. Things start to sell at the end of June, and I will sell buck lambs all the way into September and October sometimes for anyone who is looking for one into the breeding season. My breeding groups are small since I only have typically 20 ewes. You're going to have about 8 to 12 ewes per ram, and I try and use 2 rams per year. My dad will put bigger groups. He'll have 1 ram per 40 ewes typically when he's doing his bigger stuff. This is just a really sweet picture of me and my girls. We use a lot of these cattle panels kind of around to separate out a few different paddocks. And they get to graze around at different times of the year and in our pastures. And once we finish harvest in the fall, then we actually let them free range for a little while prior to the snow coming down. My favorite and most fun thing that I do is the Minnesota State Fair. One of the reasons I really wanted to continue showing sheep was so I could go to the state fair every year. And I enjoy doing the dress a sheep competition. If any of you have ever been up there, it happens on Sunday, the first Sunday of the state fair in the open class sheep barn. There's a fun competition where we get to dress a sheep up. So as you can see, we were minions one year. Our Polypay U sure put up with a lot that year. And then one other year we were Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. I had a 4-H'er that we used her little market lamb for that year. And it was so fun to be able to paint him blue, but you wouldn't believe how hard it was to get that blue out. We at least knew that she wasn't going to be showing it anymore. So that kind of was a good thing. But couple more things I wanted to just mention about my flock in general. I've hit my goal number right now. I've always wanted to be right around 20 to 30 was always kind of my flock goal that I wanted to be at. And so it's nice to kind of be at that point, but I maybe someday might add a few Southdown ewes to my group. Southdown is another breed that's kind of been close to my heart when it comes to enjoying the personality of the breed and the show of it too. So maybe someday I'll get a few Southdown ewes and go from there. But we are hopefully going to be in the process of building a new barn in the next couple of years. I still do have my animals at my parents' house, just because where I'm currently living, I don't have the ability to have my sheep here. So that is one struggle I do have, is facilities. But I'm thankful that my dad is very supportive. And as I said, we kind of do it jointly, but we do still have our separate flocks. So it's kind of nice when he can check the sheep during the day, especially while I'm at work, but not everyone gets that. So do what you can. Barn cameras do come in handy if you ever can use them. Sometimes you can watch them while you're sitting at work and do kind of stuff from there. So all right, that's kind of just a little background on my production that I do here at Follow On Farms. I would be very happy to answer any additional questions, any more information. I'd be very happy to go in depth and kind of let you know a little bit more behind the scenes of everything. This just kind of scratched the surface of some stuff, but I'm looking forward to hearing your guys' questions in the chat, and looking forward to talking to you. Feel free to send me an email, and I am on social media. Check out Follow On Farms on Facebook and Instagram. We would love to have some more followers, and you can see kind of what we're doing on a regular basis. So thank you to the organizers tonight for inviting me, and looking forward to answering everyone's questions.
Thank you, Caroline. We do have quite a number of questions coming in here, which is fabulous. We might not be able to get to all of them just for time constraints, but we will get to a number of these. You just talked about cameras. Somebody wanted to know what brand of barn camera do you use?
So I actually don't use a barn camera. I have been looking into them myself. I have looked at a few different options, either a cellular camera. I also deer hunt. So for me, I was looking for a deer hunting camera I could also use in the sheep barn. And there's also a couple different companies out there that do barn cameras themselves. Where our barn is located, we have the disadvantage that we have to try and get internet to it. And so that is why we do not have barn cameras quite yet, but it is definitely on the list of investments. But thank you for the question.
I know in the dairy industry, we talk about that in the maternity barns a lot too, and there's so many different options out there. And you just kind of do, find whatever works best. And yes, internet, you are correct, is usually a deciding factor.
If you want to know more suggestions, feel free to email me, and I can definitely send you what I've looked into, and I'd be happy to share what I found.
Do you preg check your sheep?
I do not actually. I've wanted to, but I just haven't probably put in the funds to have someone out and preg check them every year. I just kind of throw the rams in and really hope for the best, to be honest. I'd love to do it, but it sometimes can be tough to find someone to come out. And for 20 ewes, it can be a little tough, on your pocketbook sometimes too.
Sure. Do you, being that you run 2 rams, do you DNA test them in order to have to register them? How does that work?
With the Polypays, we don't do any DNA testing. I do test them for the scrapie codon, your RR, QR, QQ. And as part of this new GEMS project that I will be involved in this year, we'll be taking some more tissue samples as part of that. Might get some more additional data when it comes to genetic testing, but I haven't exactly done that to this date. I mostly just have been testing for the RR, QR, QQ scrapey stuff.
Thank you. When and for what reasons do you cull ewes from your flock?
Most of the time, if I'm culling something from my flock, it is related to an udder issue or a mothering issue, or if I ever had any lambing troubles with her. So if a bad udder comes up and she's only good on one side, she's typically going to have to be gone the next year. If she really is a mean mom, doesn't seem to accept her lambs well from year to year, she typically is going to go. I like to keep my girls, so I probably don't cull as hard as I should. But when it comes to certain things that I'm going to have to put in a little extra work or bottle feed, most of the time those things will go a lot more quickly. She'll raise her lamb for that year, but she'll be culled basically right after weaning.
Great. Well, Caroline, I think we're going to switch over to Tom right now, but Caroline, there are some questions here in the chat box. You can roll through those and answer them if you would. And then our panelists are also answering some of them as well too. So thank you, Caroline. We appreciate your time and your knowledge. And that was really a great presentation and fun to learn about your farm.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.
Yep. All right. Tom Peterson from Sauk Centre, Minnesota is going to tell us a little bit more on how he got started in the boar goat business. Go ahead, Tom. Tommy, is your microphone? You have to unmute yourself there.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Now you
I can see you too. Yep.
Try again.
Yep, they're okay. I can see your screen now.
Okay.
Yep, there it is.
Good evening, everybody. Tom Peterson, Minnesota. Try again. Sauk Centre, Minnesota. For lack of a better name tonight, the name of the operation is Imaginary Meat Goats. The reason I settled on Imaginary was Imaginary Dairy was the name of my dairy, and reason for Imaginary was it was a figment of my imagination for many, many years, and it was going to take a lot of imagination to get it up and going. Not just unlike my goat operation so far. So for tonight, this is Imaginary Meat Goats, and we'll see if that name changes over the course of time. A little bit about me and my background. I'm originally from Chaska, Minnesota, just about 35 miles southwest of the Twin Cities. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I always wanted to be a farmer. Both my parents grew up on dairy farms, and I had several aunts and uncles that all dairy farmed. And for whatever reason, something short-circuited in my brain that I needed to be a farmer. So from about age 4 on, being a dairy farmer was my life's ambition. I attended the University of Minnesota in St. Paul for animal science. After graduation, I worked in the dairy nutrition field for 5 years here in West Central Minnesota. In 2007, I finally realized a lifelong dream of owning and operating my own dairy herd. That ended in 2012 when we had $8 corn for the first time. I was in a rented facility buying my own feed, or buying all the feed, and it was time to take a break, regroup, refocus, and hope that I could find my own facility and maybe some land to grow some of my own feed. I currently work for Minnesota Select Sires, which is a dairy and beef genetics company, and here in West Central Minnesota. So just a little bit of the background here, maybe help you understand where I'm coming from and some of my thought processes, and I guess just some of my decision making. So current stats, I currently run about 50 commercial Spanish Boer cross does. Yeah, for lack of a better definition, they're Spanish. There's definitely Boer influence, Spanish influence, potentially some Kiko, a little bit of everything, but definitely a Boer influence and some Spanish as well. About 20 replacement females right now, which may or may not all become replacements, and have too many bucks. I run a total confinement system, which is probably different from a lot of sheep and goat people. And by total confinement, all I mean is they're not on pasture. All their feed is brought to them. I'm attempting to do an accelerated production system. I wouldn't say I'm there yet, but it's an attempt. Kids are sold at the goal target market is 60 to 65 pounds. Trying to wean kids at about 8 weeks. So this was a Christmas gift last year, which I found very amusing. Funny because it's true. I only wanted 10 goats, but if God wants me to have 20, then 40 it is. And that's kind of the situation I've quickly found myself in. So how I got here. So over the last 5 to 7 years, I've just noticed more and more goats showing up around the countryside, whether it be county fair, state fair, our local fairgrounds. Rented the facility to Boer goat producers. They had a breeding stock sale here for about 3 years, 5 years ago. So it just really caught my attention, like what's going on with all the goats. I've always thought they were kind of neat animals. Then 2017 and the summer of 2017 and the spring of 2018, there were 2 very sizable operations that started in our county, both by friends of mine. So it really caught my attention, like what's going on with all the goats, and just started digging into it a little bit more. Like I say, I didn't grow up on a farm. I don't have a farm to go back to. I currently don't own a farm. For me, goats have been a way to get back into production agriculture with minimal facilities, and potentially have a profitable business in agriculture outside of my full-time job. So in the fall of 2019, I just got tired of being patient. Kind of just kept telling myself, be patient, find a place and let's try this. Some friends of mine had bought a farm, and there was a building site with that farm, and a light bulb went off in my head that, hey, that barn's empty. I wonder if they'd let me put some goats in there. So I asked, and they kind of looked at me funny, like, what do you want to use that little barn for? And I said, goats, and they looked at me even funnier. So reasons to raise goats. You've tried all other livestock and decided you need a real challenge. I will be the first to admit this has been a learning experience, and I guess I'll share some of those experiences with you, but I've heard it said this way before, and I can echo that statement very clearly. So here's a picture of the facility, or at least one of the facilities that I'm using. In the middle is a picture of the barn. On a cold December night, probably 120-year-old dairy barn, had 24 stanchions in it. It was full of cats and mice and junk. So my friends got the advantage of having me clean the barn out for them. As you can see, the gutter was still there. Pulled the barn cleaner out, filled it in with class 5, and built some pens. So there's about 5 pens in this barn. This is just showing 2 or 3 of them, but anyway, that's kind of what it started as, and the process. This is more of the finished product. You can kind of see across the barn a couple more pens, and then a fence line feeder. So just to prove it was a dairy barn, here's the old milk house, the flat top bulk tank, and the little receiver jar. This is the office / vet room. So October 23rd, 2019 was my first day as a goat producer. I started with 23 basically gate cut crossbred dolings. By gate cut, they weren't individually selected. I bought them from a friend of mine. These were commercial dolings. He went through his pen and market kids and pulled out some does he thought looked respectable. But there wasn't a whole lot of selection criteria put into them. My initial goal was to start with about 30. He just had these, we were a little short of 30, had 22 or 23. Started with them, and then I bought a couple more just to get up to the 30 mark there by the end of the year. I started with dolings and crossbred, like I say, just kind of market kids, because this was an experiment. I didn't want to go, all in buying registered stock, spending a lot of money on animals if this wasn't something that I was going to really want to do or be able to do. So I got in, maybe a little more economically, but it was a way, like I say, to experiment. I wouldn't say I wouldn't do it this way again, but I would. If I was, destined to be a goat producer, I probably would go find maybe do a little more selection as far as picking animals for breeding stock, and maybe a little more selection criteria. But at the same time, like I said, it was an experiment, so this was the right way for me to get started. This was once they were all moved in, happy. And 5 minutes later, of course, somebody is out. One common saying is, if it'll hold water, it'll hold a goat. And that could not be more true. So this goat here happens to be named Fiesta, because I told her if she did not stay in her pen, she was going to end up to be somebody's Fiesta goat when they ate her. So she's still here, but doesn't stay in the best. So I have a lot of homemade facilities and homemade equipment. Like I say, it's an old barn, and this was, a work in progress and an experiment. I didn't want to get in too financially deep, so I've modified the facility. Maybe you saw in the first picture that the feed bunks were kind of a more dairy or cattle type of a setup where they stick their head through. Obviously, goats can squeeze through there. I experimented with different opening sizes, and the problem is you get it small enough to keep the does in, and then you put the buck in and he can't get his head in. Kids running in and out. So I kind of got tired of just that hassle and went to these kind of style feeders. So I adopted the plans a little bit from like Premier One has feeder plans similar to this, and I modified them a little bit to fit the facility. I feed hay and grain in these. I wouldn't say I'm completely satisfied with this design just yet. I'd like a better way to clean them. So I've got some different ideas on how to modify it, but for the time being, this seems to work pretty well. Like I said, this barn's probably 100+ years old. It's not insulated. There's no water lines in there, so all the water gets carried with a 5-gallon pail. This is a picture of the water I made. The stainless steel pipe there, that's part of the old pipeline. In the winter, there'll be an elbow that's attached to the bottom there, and I run my extension cord through that, and it goes into that little hole in the top of the tank, and for the heater. I needed a way to keep it away from the goats, and then you can see the plywood baffle in there, so from the inside they can't get at anything. So this has worked really well. Only downside is, occasionally you want to dump it out and clean it out, and it takes a little bit to take that all apart. But this has been my little invention as far as keeping water to them and keeping the goats from destroying too much stuff. This would be my creep facility. Again, handmade or homemade gate panels. They're 4-foot panels. They actually started as pallets that I modified, and just go from there. They all have eye screws on the ends, so they can be connected with steel rods, and make temporary pens, or pens of any size. But again, just took some designs from different online sources, and found what scrap lumber I had and other materials, and built some of these things. And this would be some handling facilities. Same thing, built a guillotine gate last spring. Handling facilities make life so much easier by having proper handling facilities. I wouldn't say that this is perfected yet, but it was an attempt at trying to make life a little bit easier. And again, I don't have a lot of space here, so I don't have room for just a handling facility that stays up. This needs to be portable and movable. And then again, don't have a whole lot invested in it. So this is one of my best investments. I bought a scale kit from A&A Scale. They sell you the load cells and the scale head, and then the wiring, but you have to build the platform. The reason I say it's one of my best investments is trying to gauge the weight of an animal, especially when you're trying to meet a specific weight for market, or deciding what size to breed animals as far as first time does. Is she 35 pounds? Is she 55 pounds? Is she 85 pounds? Well, some people are better at that than others. Well, this is a 55-pound sack of feed. Is she bigger or smaller? Well, that's grossly inaccurate sometimes. So I love the scale. It's helped so much. This is my kidding setup. I use jugs. I've attempted to not use jugs, and it did not work very well. I have a couple ideas as to why it maybe didn't work very well. I'd like to maybe try that again, just simply from a labor standpoint. But these are 3 different jugs, but most of them are 4x8s. It's plenty big. Why 4x8s? Mostly because my panels are 4x4. A 4x4 jug was a little small, so you put 2 of them together and you get an 8-foot section. So again, a hay feeder that's actually made out of a 15-gallon drum, a water from another plastic drum, and then the 55-gallon drums converted into warming barrels, which you've probably seen a lot of work very well. I don't kit anything from about the middle of December until the middle of March, simply because of the facility. It's not insulated, and it can get pretty cold. So that creates some challenges in trying to have an accelerated kitting system. By accelerated kitting system, that means trying to have 3 kid crops every 2 years. The doe has kids on her for 8 weeks, give her about a 30-day recovery period to put some weight back on and rebreed. So anyway, again, that the facility creates some challenges just due to our climate here. From there, they go to group pens. I try to put them in mixing pen of about 5 does with their kids, and then combine mixing pens, into groups of 10 does with their kids. That seems to work pretty well in this facility for the size of the pens. Again, kids can get up in at least one side of the barn that I didn't convert those feeders. And they use the manger as their playground, so which has its pros and cons. I have noticed that when kids can get up into the manger, they do start on creep feed quicker, simply because I think mom is eating and they catch on to that as well. So some challenges that I've encountered. Goats are a novelty, and I put that in quotation marks simply because it's just really not mainstream or as mainstream as some of the other species. And that creates some challenges. Most of the resources that I come across are for pasture-based systems, which really don't mean much to me. When you see stuff out of, a lot of it comes out of Oklahoma or Tennessee, their two main concerns are parasites and predators. Those are much lower on my list of concerns, simply because they aren't on pasture. My biggest predator is probably a mouse. And with that, just benchmarks. Again, pasture-based systems, kidding once a year, weaning at 90 or 120 days, it's just way different. So it doesn't line up when you're trying to see, am I doing well or not? Markets aren't as local as maybe we're accustomed to with some other species. So you can just take them to the sale barn, but you're probably not going to do very well on them. So getting them to their final destination, there's some travel and logistics involved. Veterinarian and nutritional professionals can be very limited. I'm very fortunate here. We've got a vet clinic in Freeport, Freeport Vet Service, that they have some experience with the goats. Tom and Melissa Zeck. They've been very knowledgeable in vaccines and treatment and just overall management. So very fortunate that way. Also, we have a big game dealer here that has a lot of experience with sheep and goats, and again, not just pasture-based systems. So that can be a problem in a lot of places, but I feel very fortunate that here we're not. Limited vaccines and approved pharmaceuticals for goats. Not a lot of research is put into that, just simply because there aren't a lot of goats. Again, more of a novelty species versus mainstream production animals. Lack of genetic information. This was something that made me realize how much I take for granted some of the information in my career. With a dairy cow, there's probably 150 different traits that I can have or a dairy bull I can have at the fingertips. It's right on the internet. If I'm looking for a buck, I might find somebody that has birth weight, weaning weight, average daily gain. I would say that's in the upper quartile of breeders. Probably find some purebred people that have pedigrees with ennoblements, but that means very little to me in a production system. So we're very archaic on the genetic side with goats. I think there is some work being done by the Boer goat and Spanish goat associations to maybe start creating some EPDs, realizing that there's a need for some of these things, but we still got a ways to go. And goats are not the tough, indestructible creatures that their reputation has them painted to be. They actually are, a little bit fragile, and again, kind of tough critter to raise, like I had alluded to earlier. So what I've learned from raising goats, we've got a saying that if they can, they will, and then they'll do it again. When I'm building putting a pen together, hanging a gate, no, they won't put their head there. No, that won't happen. No, if there's a chance that they could, they will. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a goat out of a predicament only to come back 5 minutes later and find him in the exact same spot. I don't understand it, but it's a goat thing. Putting this presentation together was not hard to find pictures. I've got a library of pictures. This is, probably just a quarter of the pictures of stupid things I've seen goats do. So if they can, they will, and then they'll do it again. So also what I've learned, you haven't seen picky until you've tried to feed a goat. People think they eat everything. No, they're very picky about what they eat. Just happens to be what they desire is, as far as weeds and brush, are some things that we don't think very highly of. Goats are jerks. They're very destructive, or can be very destructive. You may have seen some of the pictures. I have those green gates with the wire mesh. I bought them because I saw pictures of people with goats, and that's what they had. And they have just completely destroyed all the ones that I have not put plywood on. They sit and fight between them. They bang their heads against them, and have destroyed most of the ones I've had. So goats in general are destructive. Bucks, especially this time of year when the rut is on, are incredibly destructive. They're very food motivated, go into the pen to try to feed them. I try not to do that because you get mauled. And then goats are also jerks to each other. That social hierarchy is really, really ingrained. And maybe it's in all species and I just haven't noticed it as much. Again, my background is mostly with dairy cattle. They're maybe a little more subdued, but so oftentimes you feed and all of a sudden you hear somebody screaming because somebody's been hooked or somebody's pushed around. And introducing new goats, they will really pound them into submission. So you can never really put one goat in because they will be low man on the totem pole, but try to put groups of goats together. So that was a big learning curve. What my friends think feeding goats is like versus what it's actually like. That's a very accurate meme. So again, destructive monsters. This is a group of about market ready kids. They are standing on a self feeder that they tipped over and spilt about $60 worth of feed all over the ground, and they were happy about it. People ask me, what age you sell them at, and I tell them, they're cute when they're little, but by the time they get to this size, you're not too sad to put them on a truck because of things like this. This is probably one of the key learnings. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. With goats, an ounce of prevention is worth 1,000 pounds of cure. If you notice a goat that looks off, you don't wait till tomorrow morning to treat it. You need to treat it now, and even treatment. I've had less than ideal success with treatment. It seems like prevention is so much more important, whether it's dealing with respiratory issues, coccidiosis, scours, trying to get a goat to to graft a kid on. Just preventing all that stuff goes so much further than trying to cure it. So cleanliness is next to godliness. I've really learned that and tried to work through that. Again, winter babies, try not to have them in the dead of winter. But we get some these were March kids, middle of March, and they were a little bit of a surprise. Came in the morning, it was 14 below zero, and there laid 2 kids, very, very cold. This kid was put in a warm water bath, brought up to a temperature and bundled up, got some milk in her. A couple hours later, she started to perk up, and within 12 hours, got her back. So there are some success stories as well. Feminine touch definitely doesn't hurt. This was a really good success story. This is my girlfriend, Kristen. This was probably 2 years ago. Same kind of story, came in to do chores at night, and there laid 2 little kids. One was licked off, the other was laying there, not touched, cold, shivering. We dried her off and put her under a heat lamp, and didn't seem to help too much. I thought, well, she's maybe too far gone. Her request was, well, let's at least take her home so she can die in comfort. And brought her home, tried to get her warmed up, fed a little bit, didn't have a lot of interest. But about 11 o'clock, I said, I'm going to bed. And I did. Well, she was bound and determined to save this little goat, and got on the internet and saw what she could find. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened to a little goat standing on the bedroom floor. This little goat was later named Windy, and she kind of became a mascot. So you can see she got to go to Dairy Queen and got to celebrate her birthday. So definitely the feminine touch doesn't hurt. Goals and looking ahead, finding my own facility. improving labor efficiency. That barn, again, 100-year-old barn, it's all manual labor, all the feed's carried in, all the manure is carried out. And it's no fun. I'd like to get to 100 mature females in my own facility, and from there, maybe grow. Again, just going to depend on markets, depend on facilities, depend on a lot of things, but I'd like to get to at least 100 just as a core group, and then, maybe expand from there. Increase kids weaned per doe, increase average daily gain. Again, I'm trying to do an accelerated system, so I need to increase the efficiency of off-season breeding. Need to dial in my nutrition and reduce feed cost, and I need to do a better job of culling as well. So again, labor efficiency, inefficiency, it's all shovel work. Last fall, I actually put a group of goats over at the neighbors. This is a little better. At least I can get in there with a skid loader, but it's still not ideal. So I told you my background was in the dairy industry. We are numbers hungry. I believe that you can't manage anything that you don't measure. And again, a lot of the information that's out there is all based on pasture systems. So it doesn't necessarily correlate. So what is a good conception rate? What is a good, kids to doe ratio? Weaning weight, or kids weaned per doe? What is a good death loss? There's not a lot of good information out there. There's a big range. So I've taken it upon myself just to start recording some key metrics and then benchmark against myself. And, if there's other producers that would be interested in doing something like this, it'd be great to share information. We've got a small group here in central Minnesota, about 5 or 6 commercial producers that have, a couple hundred does, and sharing some information like this, I think, would be incredibly helpful. So these are some of the metrics I started looking at, and thankfully we're headed in the right direction after I think 4 kid crops. So it's been a nice way to benchmark at least myself, and seeing if some of the changes I'm making are helping. This won't show up real well, but again, benchmarking, this is the Excel sheet, and some of the things I look at: birth weight, date weaned, weaning weight, how many days they were weaned at, an average daily gain. I adjust it to a 60-day weaning weight, and then look at it by sex. So again, with the average daily gain and increasing kids weaned per doe, I've started experimenting with Savannah goats. They've been renowned for their mothering ability, which maybe the Boer goats aren't as good at. They're supposed to be good mothers and then have some of the same carcass traits as Boers. So I bought a purebred buck and 2 purebred does a year ago last March, and brought a lot of stuff to that buck. These are some of the doe kids. There's some Savannah influence in some of my replacements. And that little guy over there was one of the kids this spring. So it's a work in progress. It's an experiment. We'll see. I try to track kids by buck. I try to put 1 buck on a group of does and track that. And I've been surprised by performance. Sometimes it's not the buck that you think would be the best that wins. So with that, thank you. I want to thank the moderators for inviting me and sharing my experience. All I can say is I get, most of my information from other producers and just sharing, again, because there's not necessarily a lot of information out there. So with that, I will answer any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Those are some really fun pictures of your goats, and some really great information. And speaking of sharing, we have a question. Would you be willing to share your spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay, so you can just send that to me, and then I can send it out to the registrants.
Sure.
We do have a couple of questions. One is about feed. Where do you get your feed? You mentioned big gain. Do you want to just elaborate?
Yeah, so the producer I got the goats from was working with Big Gain. It's actually Ecker Feeds in New Munich, Minnesota. That's who he was working with. So I just started that way, so they were on the same feed. so far that's been a good fit. Travis Molitor has a lot of experience with sheep, has some experience with goats, has been a good resource, and they also have some resources within their company. So so far, yeah, Big Gain's been a good resource that way. So
Okay. And then we had another question regarding like vaccinations and dewormers. Do you use a dewormer, and can you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, so I initially was vaccinating. I still vaccinate CD and T. Try to be religious about that. I was a little bit more aggressive with deworming initially. Like I say, parasites aren't a problem because they're all inside. Probably the bigger parasites I have with are lice and mites. But as far as worms, they're not on pasture, so they're not picking those things up. My two biggest challenges health-wise would be respiratory issues, being inside, and it's an old barn where ventilation can be a challenge. And then with kids, coccidiosis. So both those, it's just been sanitation, trying to keep bedding changed more frequently, keeping ammonia low, dust low, and then the cocci load low. I made some changes last spring with the kid crop, and it made a world of difference in coccidiosis control, at least pre-weaning. And again, just benchmarking and tracking some of those things, it's really helped see if some of those changes have made a difference. But I probably need to do at least an annual worming or something for parasites. That's one of my kind of to-dos, is sit down with the vet, put some SOPs and some vaccination protocols together just to get some of that dialed in a little bit more. But like I say, worming just is really not a big thing for confinement goats.
Thank you. What was the brand of the scale that you purchased?
It was A&A scales. If you just Google livestock scales, you'll get a bunch of different options, but I saw some good reviews on it. It's a real simple kit, real simple instructions to put together. Like I say, you have to build a platform to make it work, but the neat thing about it is you can kind of make it any way you want to fit your facility. So, but yeah, A&A, I had seen a lot of good reviews on it. It wasn't overly expensive, so.
All right. How does your job with cattle genetics influence your goat operation? You kind of talked about that during your spreadsheet. Does
Yeah,
it impact
so
decisions?
yeah, so just again, from my genetics side of things, everything is numbers, and it's just been archaic to me what we have for goats, because like I say, when I go to find a buck, it's like, well, he looks good. Well, is he good or isn't he? So numbers, I'm very numbers driven, very analytical. That's where those spreadsheets came from, because I wanted some information. Obviously, just understanding average daily gain, some of the things that go into that, maternal traits and such. I guess that plays into some of the decisions as well. But mostly, like I say, from the genetic side, just the numbers and the data that we have in other species that we don't have in goats has made me go and develop some of those spreadsheets and such for my own operation.
Alrighty, I have one more question for you, but I am going to put up our second poll while we get to this question here. Do you breed the does the same year that they're born? What weight do you use to breed, or do you wait to breed the year after birth? So they probably have to be that year old, right?
Yeah, so it depends a little bit on the time of year, and this is again kind of one of these things that if you put that question on Facebook, you will get 50 different answers. There are plenty of people that wouldn't consider a doe being bred until she's 18 months, and other people are on the other end of that spectrum. I've kind of shot for trying to breed at about 7 or 8 months on replacements, so they'll have their first kid in 12 to 14 months. And for some people, they just really turn their nose up at that. You're going to burn her out, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. But that's where record keeping really comes in. I had a couple doe kids that were they were oopses as far as being bred by their pen mates last year, just because of facilities. That doe kid, she had a single buck kid, but she raised that kid phenomenally well and was one of the highest gaining kids in the group. So you can't, she had her first kid at 11 months. So I have a hard time believing that that was a problem for her. Now every goat's different, but that's just where tracking some of this stuff really comes in, because I can't necessarily go to the university and say what's the right size, because again, there's just not a lot of information. Recommendations are 75% of their mature body weight. Well, most of my does are, probably 100 to 120 pounds. And, so that's going to put them somewhere in that 70 to 80 pound range for breeding. And so far it hasn't been a problem. I've maybe gotten a little aggressive and backed off, but right now, I guess I'd say my target, if it doesn't fall outside of a window that I don't want them having kids in, would be 12 to 14 months to have their first kid.
Awesome. And I have one final question for you. You talked about your babies get coccidiosis. What do you do with that, or how do you deal with it?
Yep. Yeah. So this was something my vet really made me aware of. Her point was, she said, in the dairy side of things, if it's dry, we think it's okay. She said with goats, that's not the case. So what I did last spring was I tried to make sure that a kid never went into a dirty pen. They were born in a clean pen. When they left the kidding jug into a group pen, that was all fresh. So there was 5 does with all their kids that all went into a clean pen. When they went into a group pen, it was a clean pen. So they're always going to a clean pen. As they get older, I'm not cleaning it necessarily every day, but trying to keep, and then separating them from older animals, that they weren't with any other older animals besides their mothers. And it made just a huge difference. The year before, I had a lot of trouble with cocci, but again, they were getting intermingled with older animals that maybe didn't have kids. I put them back into a group pen that wasn't cleaned. It was dry, but just the sanitation has made a world of difference. Again, just making sure that babies always go to something that's clean, even though it is dry, it's not necessarily clean. So babies always go to something clean.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that knowledge. I just want to say a big thank you again to both Caroline and Tom for joining us tonight. We did put their information in the chat box, and I will send that out in an email as well, along with Tom's spreadsheet. So thanks again for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time. I've seen that some of you guys are from all over the US and even international tonight. So we will let you know when our next webinar is. Otherwise, have a great evening.
Thank you.